Please watch to the end. Comment and respond to other people's comments.
Man accused of a deadly Memorial Day road rage shooting on I-10 just across the Mississippi state lines in jail tonight. Chet Landry breaks down how investigators worked for weeks to find and arrest Janvique Franklin Jr.
On July 17th, a Janvique Franklin Jr. was arrested.
With that announcement, the nearly 2-month investigation into the shooting of Brandon Box now has a suspect. The 24-year-old Hammond, Louisiana man was being questioned for another incident in Louisiana when the chips began to fall.
It was a day or two after the shooting had occurred. There was a domestic violence call made to the Hammond Police Department. So it was just by really coincidence that they showed up and made contact with Mr. Franklin and saw a firearm there at that time. But also Mr. Franklin had admitted to being in Florida, coming back from Florida to Louisiana the day before.
Of course, the Hammond police had no idea at the time that this information was only part of what would eventually lead to a search warrant for Franklin.
Utilizing cameras from inside Highway Patrol vehicles, other police department vehicles, and cameras at the state lines, they were able to identify the vehicle that had been engaged in the confrontation with Mr. Box.
Authorities were able to determine that the vehicle was rented by Franklin. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigations, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the Hammond Police then carried out the search warrant and found their suspect.
He did make a confession. He confessed to being the shooter. He confessed to owning the firearm. So at that point, he was working with law enforcement being truthful and trying to advise them of what had occurred.
Just in the last hour, a Jackson County jury finding a man guilty after what's being described as a deadly case of road rage.
You might remember this case from Memorial Day 2020 when a Gulfport man was shot to death on Interstate 10 in Jackson County. Noah Noble has been in the courtroom all day, and he starts us off live with the latest on this case.
Yeah, Hugh, this was a tough case for jurors to deliberate. Even though it only took them a little over an hour to make a decision, this was not very cut and dry. They had two options on the table. Was this a case of cold-blooded murder, or was this self-defense? Those were the two arguments that lawyers were presenting to the jurors before they went back to deliberate. I'll bring you up to speed on this case. It happened Memorial Day 2020. Janvique Franklin, who was the defendant here, was traveling back home to Hammond, Louisiana on I-10 in Jackson County. He, his girlfriend, and two of his family members were coming back from a trip to Florida. Also on I-10 westbound in Jackson County was the victim here, Brandon Box, with his friend Nicholas Crusoe in their Dodge Ram pickup truck. They were carrying a trailer. Through testimony given by the MBI special agent over this case, he says that Box made a sudden left turn on I-10, cutting off Franklin, who was in a rented SUV. There was then an exchange of words between the two. Case of road rage. They came to stop and go traffic, and Franklin threw a firework in the back of Box's truck. It went off. That caused Box to pull over to the side of the road, see what happened, make sure there was no damage. After that, Nicholas Crusoe, who was the passenger in Box's truck, told state troopers that he begged Brandon to let it go, to stop, but Brandon was in a rage and decided to go after Franklin and the rented SUV. They caught up next to each other, and that's when Franklin produced a Glock and ended up firing two shots into the truck. One of those hit Brandon, piercing his heart, and got lodged in the right side of his shoulder. That's what an MBI agent said today, according to the medical examiner's report. 2 months later, MBI and Hammond police ended up conducting a search warrant on Janvique Franklin's home. He went to the Hammond Police Department willingly and gave a statement. He admitted to shooting into Box's truck. He says that he was only trying to shoot the tires, but the bullet, like I said, ended up hitting Box and killing him later in the hospital. Today, jurors found him guilty of manslaughter. Prosecutors were hoping for second-degree murder. If you don't know the difference here, second-degree murder is a non-premeditated killing, while manslaughter is a killing that happens during a time of high passion or high stress where a reasonable person wouldn't be thinking clearly. So that's what jurors convicted Franklin of today, manslaughter. Sentencing will happen next week, and that's whenever we'll hear from family. Understandably, today they were upset. This is Brandon Box's family I'm talking about here. They were upset today. They didn't want to talk today, but they're willing to talk next week after sentencing. I'll be here in Pascagoula to let you know how long Franklin will be spending in prison or what his sentence ends up being. Until then, live in Pascagoula, Noah Noble, WLOX News Now.
Rage encounter that took a son from a mother and a husband from a loving wife.
Noah Noble was inside the Jackson County courtroom as the family told a judge why the killer should face the maximum penalty.
When they led me to his room and I saw his body laying in that hospital bed, and I finally realized he was gone. It was the loneliest and emptiest moment of my life. There is no other loneliness like losing your spouse and your very best friend.
Brandon Box's wife, Jessica, stands just feet away from the man she says took everything from her.
I lost the only life I've ever known. I lost our life together, all of our shared hopes and dreams, and what I always imagined our future would look like. My heart hurt so bad for him.
Last week, a jury found Janvique Franklin guilty of manslaughter after he fatally shot Brandon Box on Memorial Day 2020 during a road rage encounter on I-10. That night, Brandon's dying words emphasized the love he had for his wife.
When he got to the hospital, before he was sedated, he made it a point to tell the doctor to find me and to tell me that he loved me. In his dying moments, the most important thing and all that he cared about was his love for me. And to make sure that when he left this world, that I knew how much I was loved.
After court, Jessica and her mother-in-law, Box's mom, Babs, reflected on the man they both cherished.
Cared for everybody, tried to do things for people, and took care of everybody.
He was a very loving, caring, compassionate person.
We miss him so much.
Heartbroken over the loss, the mother's heart also hurts for those close to the man who took her son away.
The losing ones are his children and his mother. I feel sad for his kids. Brandon won't ever have a little boy, though.
And with the legal case over, the closing words of the presiding judge sticks with Jessica.
Our juries, our peers, have the power and the ability to decide what our society is willing to accept. And killing someone with a gun is not acceptable.
Noah Noble, WLOX News Now.
The judge sentenced Franklin to the maximum penalty for manslaughter, 20 years in prison.
Is this the correct sentence?